Hello. Now, we had to come together earlier than anticipated, but I think it's good because we'll have a brilliant panel. We're waiting for Mr. Anastasatos as well. I am Eugenia Tzortzi from Kathimerini. I'm a journalist, and we will be discussing with Mr. Ilias Lekkos, Mr. Nikos Magginas, and of course Tasos Anastasatos. Welcome, Tasos. They're all financial analysts, they're all economists with the banks, Piraeus, National Bank and Eurobank. So we will be discussing about global economy. What else? Developments that shall be created by the undertaking of the office, by the new administration, the impacts in Europe and possibly in Greece. Ilias, let me get on a first-name basis. Ilias, I'll start with you and say that you had a very interesting article published in the Tovima, in which you said that the public debt of the United States is on the increase, and it's increasing at an important rate. I heard that in 2030 it might approach the Greek percentage of the GDP. So as a percentage of the GDP, it will be similar to the Greek one, which struck me as odd, and I would like to hear from you about that. So the question is, how will the Trump administration policy will work until, from what we know so far, from what he has been announcing, in the management of this risk, and to what extent you believe that this might be a serious risk for American economy based on the dynamic they have as well? First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's both a pleasure and honor for me to be here, yet another year in this very beautiful, I would say, conference that you organize. Now, regarding the question, first of all, we'll need to ponder and think that the increase of public debt in the United States is tremendous for 2 reasons. First of all, when the global financial crisis started back in 2008-2009, the United States entered this crisis with a rate of debt to GDP close on 35%. So what the economists said before the onset of the crisis is that there were very strong arguments in favor of the opinion that said that the debt of the United States would drop to zero. It was that much optimism towards the conviction that the US had left debts behind, and given that the ratio of debt to GDP has to do with growth, many people believed that this ratio would be close to zero. Instead of this, we're in a situation where this ratio is almost 100% debt to GDP. And with some different metrics, it's close to 120%. So over the past 15 years, we have seen an unimaginable, unprecedented increase in public debt. And this has happened in an environment of very low interest rates. So nominally speaking, in terms of billions of dollars, the increase of this debt is humongous. Is this a problem for an economy such as the American one, given its dynamic and its potential? Well, at the moment it is not, because we need to keep in mind that at the moment the United States is unlike all other countries. There is a tremendous structural demand for American assets. So there's a phrase that says that the Americans have an exorbitant privilege. This is that the whole world wants to invest in them and wants to hold investments in American assets. Now, this allows them to keep interest rates at relatively low rates despite the huge deficits that they have. We're talking about fiscal deficits each year. However, this is not something that can carry on forever. And the weird thing is that regardless of whether the Democrats or the Republicans prevailed in the elections, at the moment there is absolutely no thought, there is absolutely no specific policy that would tend and be conducive to expunging these deficits and making them zero, which is why we should start pondering about Trump's policy. Yes, but reducing tariffs could lead to a reduction of this balance, which is a bit of a problem, isn't it? Well, regarding the increase in tariffs, it can be viewed, because at the moment we don't know, we can only speculate on what will happen when the Trump administration starts. And, well, this policy of tariffs can have three potential developments, where we can see three potential scenarios. The first one, which many believe it will happen, is that it's simply a bargaining tool, that he's trying to scare people into believing that he will raise the tariffs to make them willing to transact with them, to speak with them, and to strike a deal, okay, in terms of what President Trump prefers to happen. The second scenario is that maybe they do aspire to protect American economy by increasing tariffs to boost American manufacturing. The third reason that I believe has not attracted too much attention is that now, even with the Trump administration, they understand that their fiscal space has shrunk. It's not the same ratio of debt to GDP when he took over in 2017 during his first term of office. So they may be thinking of tariffs as an offset fiscal tool, so that any tax reductions will be offset by increased revenue from the increased tariffs. Consequently, I believe that the new treasurer, the new Secretary of the Treasury, might realize what an increase in tariffs might do to the United States, not for. So they may think that the reductions of taxes will be offset by the additional revenue that will come from the tariffs. I don't think this will be the end scenario, okay? We will see the debt to keep on increasing. Is that a fear, says the moderator? Yes, says the speaker. Until when? Yes, but there's a lot more leeway for the American economy to be, if you like, of a bigger deficit than any other economy in the world. Tasos? Well, what, same question? Yes. To what extent do you agree that the tariffs will work positively for the economy, or that we will cross the red line that will create inflation pressures? And all this low interest rate policy will be, well, if not inverted, will be slowed down. Now, to what Ilias said, I should like to add that there is another parameter, that of a potential of reduction of state expenditure, which Mr. Trump has already said they will do, and have commissioned Elon Musk to do it. I mean, how realistic is it to have them reduced when 2/3 are inflexible? It's salaries and pension. But he said that he will make government smaller, so that he will reduce costs. Now, realistically speaking, and in theory, imposing a tariff protection policy by the United States will work to increase inflation, both of the US but also their key commercial partners. It will slow down world commerce, so it will slow down growth as a consequence. But I would like to introduce some footnotes into these predictions. Regarding international trade, to calculate a clear loss in the prosperity of all involved parties, we should surmise that it was in full competition between the partners, and then something might rock its boat and bring about a distortion. Of course, this does not happen. International commerce is far from being considered as purely competitive, so the impact will depend on the mixture, adopted. Now, in case they are involved in a tariff exchange war, because the other countries will not sit on their hands, it will be a lose-lose situation. Okay, we need to take into consideration that Trump has committed to some deregulation reductions. He will reduce licensing burdens, compliance costs for businesses in specific areas, including which is compliance with green transition. Now, all these things were felt by the markets as positive. So there was a rally in the markets on the day after the elections. But this will have to be weighed against the negative impact that tariffs will supposedly have. Now, a short answer is we don't know. No one has a picture of the exact mixture and of the extent to which all these things are bargaining tools or things that will allow Trump to move full steam ahead. At any rate, European economy, which is the one of clear interest, is an economy with clear-cut structural problems that should be dealt with regardless of Trump and his policies. Nikos, what about Europe? Would the imposition of tariffs create inflation pressures? And how can Europe react? And if so, how? Well, surely, of course, I couldn't agree more with my colleagues that we still don't have enough visibility regarding the extent of what they will do. Now, these announcements, whether these announcements are negotiating tools and bargaining tools, and to what extent these tariffs will be made actual measures. Now, I would like to say a few things about commerce and trade in the Eurozone. It is often heard that it is a more open economy than other areas, but we shouldn't forget that approximately 2/3 of trade in the Eurozone concerning goods is intra-community, is within the EU. So this gives us some defense. Now, the Eurozone and the European Union is dependent on the inflow of raw materials and technology from transatlantic commerce, so we depend on them more on them than they do on us. And of course, the first step in the policy of higher tariffs and the inflation risks are controlled, I think, may be controlled. Having trade with the United States being 13% of the European imports, as regards exports to the United States, we're around 20%. Now, I believe that any inflation pressures would not be significant. Where things become difficult is when and if we enter into a chapter that Mr. Almeida, Ambassador Almeida, mentioned already, pressures from the US to Europe to change the trade policy overall. There, the problems for Europe and Greece will be many more, because we have a 20% imports from China, and Europe has a relatively high level that is close to us or slightly lower. So if we go to an international scenario of tariffs increasing and offsets, then the inflation problem may be aggravated. Another development might work as an offset is that the facilitation of fossil fuel extraction might lead to lower prices of energy products during this Trump term of office. This might assist Greece because we're still heavily dependent on transport and part of our economy in fossil fuel. For the Eurozone, it will be a relief of the pressure they're under. So there are mixed trends, and mixed pressures. And in the scenario of a mild increase of tariffs, and rather than unilateral measures or pressures to exert pressures and measures on China, the inflation effect will be limited. What about defense and security in Germany, the need for more expenditure in these sectors? How do you believe they will affect us, Ilias, if you can? The needs are given. The thing is what Germany will decide to do. At the moment, we have this debt rule that limits them tremendously, not simply in the fiscal sector, but in exercising their fiscal policy and financial policy. The present government, in reality, fell when the federal court did not allow them to implement some measures. They considered some expenditure was unconstitutional. So the framework of financial policy exercise in Germany is very restrictive for the Germans themselves and subsequently for the rest of Europe. So we will have to expect and wait and see what will happen in German politics to see what will happen next. Now, what Nikos said, the drill baby drill, might benefit Europe. Is this a sector that might will help shake Germany out of this restrictive position they're in? And another question, it's an open debate, you can answer if you feel you can. There's a lot of rumor that this plan of green transition was very strict, very ambitious. And the question is, do you foresee a trend to mitigate this course to zero emissions? And would it be something that we would need to do to move towards such a strategy or policy? Ilias, you can pick up where you left off and give us the other answer as well. Well, right, you see, as we all said, there's a lot of moving parts in this process, a lot of variables as to what will happen with inflation, energy prices, and we'll need to think about what will happen with currency exchange rates. Because the first thing that will move, and the first thing that has attempted to equalize these much discussed tariffs is exchange rates. So if there's a trend or a will on behalf of the United States to impose tariffs on European products, the euro dollar from 1.12 is now 1.05, 1.06. So if we have tariffs, it might be parity, one-on-one. So 10% tariffs, already the markets through the exchange rate have been absorbed. A second part has to do with the offer of oil in a global economy that slowly is slowing down. An increase of offer on behalf of the United States, either from schist gas or other more traditional sources, will lead to lower lower oil prices. So there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of things that may affect inflation from all sides. Now, regarding the history, the story about green transition, again, there are two ways to see that. One might see that from a purely environmental point of view, where we'll definitely need to see the speed of transition, but we should not ignore that for an area such as Europe, that's a pure importer of energy, be that natural gas or oil, the green transition has a tremendous geostrategic importance. The more electricity and green energy that we produce in Europe increases, the more our dependence from Russia or from the United States or from other energy-producing countries is reduced. I'm talking about energy-producing countries. Specifically for Greek economy, and I would be glad to come back to this later on. Yes, we will, says the moderator. This story about green transition, regardless of the speed in which we can or we must move towards, because maybe there was an overambitious European policy, is of determining importance. The green transition, in my opinion, well, not in 20 or 30 years, but in the next decade, may be the solution to a number of Greek economy problems. Tasos? Yes, well, I'll start with energy first. It is indeed in the interest of Europe to move towards a policy of energy independence. That being said, we need to we need to see that we're based on an economy that is based on energy such as natural gas and renewable energy sources give an expensive energy mixture. And in the meantime, until we reach the end point of the journey, there's a serious risk for the European economy to have met risks of annihilation from the very high energy cost. To move towards a mixture that is less dependent on fossil fuel, we will have to heavily invest, seriously invest as a continent, not only in renewable energy sources, but also the storage. through batteries, as well as the network used for its transfer. Maybe in the future, some countries see the possibility to use as the base fuel nuclear power and not natural gas. We don't have the luxury that the United States do to be a company producing, an energy producing country. So for some countries this may have a sense. But Europe does not have a problem of high energy alone. It has a series of important structural problems, including the high burden on which they, the regulatory burden that they allow the entrepreneurs and enterprises to shoulder, many conflicting provisions. In terms of defense, we're still dependent on the US umbrella. The US spent 3.5% of the GDP on defense, and Europe spends 1.3%. with the exception of Greece and some other countries. So at the same time, we have a very expensive social state, and they will have to maintain the green transition, an expensive social state, higher defense expenditure, with an economy that's far less productive than that of the United States. To speak in numbers, in 1995, the per capita GDP, the productiveness of the United States and the European Union was about the same. And from 1995 until today, we have accumulated a divergence of 20%, because the European economy has proven less capable to invest in research and technology, to export technology in its production, and is lagging behind. How can we do all these three things without increasing our productivity? We can't. The two reports that have been published lately by Letta and Draghi suggest ways to deal with the problem. Letta focuses more on the broadening of common markets and banking markets and capital markets, and Draghi focuses more on the need to increase investments, the magic number of 700 billion per year of higher investments that he believes necessary to priority sectors, including which green transition, digitization, and training, in order to cover the gap that separates us from the United States, so to reach within a few years to 27% of the European GDP in investments. So it's a very ambitious target, 27%, but as I said, the problems are structural ones. And to use another catchphrase, if Trump didn't exist, Europe would have to invent him, to wake them up from the lethargic state they're in. Yes, that's true, and you've published extensively on that. Nikos, I would like to hear your opinion on whether what we're discussing may affect Greek economy, whether it affects Greek economy, given that not only Europe is introvert, if I may paraphrase Ilias slightly, but we're more introverts. Maybe this feature will be to our benefit. What are your thoughts? Is this the case? Is that the case? And what will be the impact of all this? If we're suppose that we're led to a trade war, large scale or small scale, that's besides the point. But what will be the impact? Let's see what will happen to Greece, and then I would like a comment on what Tasos pointed out regarding the need for Europe to awaken, and how feasible it is with all these divergent political behaviors today, and yesterday, and tomorrow. But let's focus on today. Thank you. And I think that we are at the best point because we have the minister here, so we'll be able to transition to the minister later on. We're talking about Greece. Welcome, Minister.
My response will quite disparate vis-à-vis the short-term and the medium-term horizon. Greek economy at the current conjuncture, what we may consider its deficiency, that is the monoculture, the great dependency on services, not the high added value manufacturing, despite the progress registered lately and small progress in state-of-the-art technology or of capital products and services, has more defensive characteristics than most of the European countries. Since most of the measures do not touch services, Greece is more exposed vis-à-vis the exacerbation of the global financial situation on basic partners, that is Germany and Italy, for instance, that they are highly exportive to the USA, while it is also comparatively protected vis-à-vis other risks having to do with the funding of energy transformation, because we still are enjoying the absorption of resources through the RRF, which give funding for such a transfer regardless of conjunctures and conditions in global capital markets. So we have a prerogative, if you like, vis-à-vis those characteristics and our capacity to fund certain changes and transformations that will bring us to the day after vis-à-vis the structure of our economy and the energy mix. The risk, however, in the midterm of our economy lies in fact that in the USA those policies will make American economy far more attractive as a receptor of foreign direct investments. It will become, therefore, the part of production change and the integration of art technologies in the production will become even more attractive. So they will be able to cover lost ground in an extremely competitive environment in the USA, for instance. In Greece, we want to exploit certain resources so as to restructure our production paradigm and find opportunities to get integrated in the global supply chains. This, from the viewpoint of the European Union, we may be able to do that. But globally speaking, the capital flows change because the USA becomes all the more attractive magnet for international capital flows. So Greece, that tries not to be based that much in the retail, tourism, and so forth, we will have a global environment which could be ever more competitive and highly difficult to attract international capital. So we may be self-confident vis-à-vis the competitive characteristics of our economy, and this current economy paradigm protects us, but in the midterm we are at a disadvantaged position vis-à-vis another economy model, which will be ever more difficult. And thus, I conclude addressing the second leg of your question. I'm less optimistic on whether Europe will have the incentive for a leap forward. I think the ambassador mentioned beforehand that Draghi report is an excellent analysis, but some of the measures proposed are not that feasible. I'm afraid in such a period where the pressure is a non-symmetric, for instance, Germany might be under extremely high pressure under the new USA politics. This is not the current conjuncture for new drop of interest rates. Therefore, with the exception of defense, capital markets will not easily offer great leaps in the architecture of the European Union. And we will not to see great initiatives after the RRF, I consider. That's why there will be a greater delay in our convergence, and this makes the development vis-à-vis the RRF absorption rate will even more slower, because unless we launch the transformation now, then the probability to see further initiatives after 26, 27 is further shrunk. So you actually tell us that we will not to expect other new initiatives and funds besides RRF. Therefore, the Draghi proposals will not be approved. Well, they might be, but very selectively, says the speaker. So I would like your view on the subject, because we, in a way, perhaps we are over-optimistic But we consider that after the RRF, we will be another instrument or another tool, either through the structural funds being equally generous. I would like your view on that, Ilias. Well, on one hand, Tasos, excuse me. On one hand, Europe has started realizing how far it lags behind. And therefore, there's no person thinking that Europe might, well, let alone Greece, of course. Let us speak about Europe that has 22% of the investment share. If it could rise that, it cannot attain that without some instruments that will boost private public investments. On the other hand, we have to be realistic. Given the political situation in Germany, there's no willingness to assume additional credit risk. How could we find a solution? There are certain instruments, some mechanisms. There are some convergence now for perhaps some indisposed funds from the first structural fund, we will see, and an overall debate for a second probable package on some name, we don't know that, which will be merely aiming at the priority sectors of the Draghi reports. So I'm not that optimistic that we will have the absorption of the debt crisis on preferential terms as the South Europe would like. Now, given the size of the problem, there will be eventually discussions launched on some kind of instruments, financial instruments to be introduced. I can't name them now, but what I know is that Greece, the European Union, has made leaps through the crisis. When we had the MOUs, there was nothing at the time, but everything was constructed as a produce of need. So similarly, because now we are heading to a similar crisis, I think Europe will find a solution. I can only hope that it does so on time. Ilias? Well, I agree with what has been said, but I believe that there is a danger here. Currently, it is the core of the Eurozone which is under pressure. Given the geopolitical environment, having the U.S. elections result and the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, the risk, therefore, lies in the core countries trying to solve the problem by themselves, individually, and not through pan-European stance. And I will give you the major of these risks. If a debate is launched on a pan-European level for loosening the austerity package and the rules, this we may be extremely positive in Greece because many agencies will believe that this relaxation in state aid rules might offer greater flexibility for financial policy and so forth. To my view, if we see at the European level a debate on the laxity of state aid, that will be a huge competitive disadvantage for weaker economies and economies with smaller and more limited fiscal margin. That will be a very nice way for big countries in the core of the European Union, especially the countries that have low debt as a ratio to the GDP, and therefore they have the fiscal margin to enhance their competitiveness unilaterally and enhance their own domestic growth rates. Any solution is not found on a pan-European level entails indirectly but clearly that big economies will further be enhanced, will be boosted, and us as a country of the region, we will have an even slower convergence trend. The position of Greece, to the extent that I can express my personal opinion, is that we should find solutions on a pan-European level. I mean, regardless of whether we will have a new RRF That is, if stronger economies pay handsomely? No. I believe that bigger economies will try not to be handsomely generous. They will try to find their own unilateral solutions for their own national GDP rise. And the clearest indication that we are moving to this negative scenario would be through the laxity of the state aid regime, which we will put the regional companies, specifically Greek enterprises, in a negatively competitive stance vis-à-vis businesses and economies of the core of the European Union. Well, we've only got 8 minutes at our disposal. I would like your view. To what extent do you consider that we have a continuous exacerbation of pressures? We had inflation pressure, but I would like you to tell us what percentage of the company's profitability is destined to investments. And does Greek economy, manufacturing, accepted the field of services? Has Greek manufacturing acquired a more dynamic stance? Will it be able to stand on its 2 feet with or without RRF and so forth? Well, indeed, the dynamism of Greek economy, or the momentum it has acquired, at a period where European manufacturing is under great tense pressure, is quite impressive, I might say. But of course, this kind first of reading also entails a second reading with more details, which are not equally appeasing. Manufacturing in Greece is in a continuous ascending trend lately, based to a great extent on traditional sectors. The restructuring of infrastructure and exports in foodstuff and pharmaceutical and chemical products actually leads the economy in an ascending trend. But let us not forget that exports are historically high, despite a small downward flex. This, however, we have 35 exports, 50 companies with more than 50% of their produce to be exported, so have a more concentrated business environment of extremely high profitability, with far less business base than previous 15 years ago. So we are at a 14-year high. Even if we exempted the refineries, so have a very high export character of big companies with high profitability for the necessary investments. The latest data published in October, and we will be expecting the new data on Friday, showed in current prices that business investments, exempted construction, are at historical high levels in Greece. This means that parts of higher added value, ownership rights, technology and so forth are even higher. But in order to have a greater convergence and set stable foundations for restructuring, we should not merely grow near to the EU average. We must exceed by at least 30 to 40%, as the previous Eastern European countries did when they acceded the European Union. We are at the right trend, and if we fully exploit the rear-bearing model, we might be accelerate, but the real restructuring and upgrading of the production paradigm is something completely different. Yes, that's true. I would come to this question on how we'll cover the production paradigm. Well, I'll give you in a nutshell. I believe that in the next 3 years, the country will continue these satisfactory growth rates because we've got the RRF, a huge package, which is a game changer because we've got fiscal stability. We can now produce primary surpluses above the goals, keep our commitments, and keep our solvency, and resist the temptations. And this has to be attributed to the current leadership of the Ministry of Finance and Economy. And this greatly keeps the credibility rate of our country, and it also gives the banking sector huge power to invest the economy. But in the long term, we will have very important challenges in all sectors. That is, the quantity of capital, employment, and the way these two are combined are determining factors, and we've got problems in all three. Regarding the manpower, we've got demographics. 1 out of 3 of Greek citizens will be above 68 years of age by 2050. And with regard to the capital, we have lost 90 billion of our deposit due to the debt crisis, and it is only now that we are in a net positive capital ratio. We must reach a 22% of investment GDP by the end of the decade. The investment should be growing by 8% real rate per year. This is extremely difficult, but it is necessary. And with regard to productivity, where again we have lost the ground, there's only one way we can gain with is reforms. We need far more reforms. We've got good reforms, so we must have an acceleration in the judgment, in the law system, in the judicial system, in the completion of the building permits and the land registry, in the increasing the quality of education in all 3 levels, not only university, and the connection with the labor market. These are the most important. And the last word from you, Ilias. Well, the issue is, if we were to identify from all those needs, all these necessary reforms, which will be the paramount one, the first and foremost? No, I take the torch from where, the relay from where Tasos left it. The biggest problem currently in Greek economy, let us not say Greek society and things even worse, has to do with the lack of skilled manpower. And of course, the overall discussion on migration and so forth is very thorny and socially more or less acceptable, but it is necessary. We can currently be glad and say that the Greek economy has a growth rate above 2% when the whole for Eurozone is 0.6%. And for next year, it might reach 1.2%, but it won't. It will be again below 1%, so we may be very glad with this narrative, but the counter-argument is, why don't we grow even faster? This, if you like, the bar of our aspirations should be higher. We have currently a series of extremely positive factors that are beneficial to Greek economy. It's not only the RRF. The RRF is indeed in a very happy conjuncture, be it by coincidence or political will, but it is extremely beneficial for the Greek production paradigm. In previous crises, in 2008, for instance, when again Europe was faced with a financial crisis, again a package was offered at the European Union level, but at the time it was directed to the car manufacturing of Europe. So it was a package which was even negative for Greek economy. everyone was given incentives to buy new cars, and many Greeks also bought new cars, therefore offered a boost to foreign economies. Therefore, this current package of green transition, digital transition, and so forth, this is a package which is really very apt to the needs and characteristics of Greek economy. But we must deal with two major problems. The one is the lack of specialized skilled manpower, and the second has to do the electric power transmission grids. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And thus, after this panel, you will be even more critical to what the minister has to tell us. Let me thank Mr. Anastasatos, Mr. Lekkos, and Mr. Magginas. Thank you.